Hello, we are Coping Life Talk, and today we have a nutritionist specialist, Shelly Najjar. Najjar or Nagar? How do you say that, Shelly?
Najjar.
Najjar. Welcome, and we are so happy to host you today because this is a very important question. And just like we chatted before your podcast, how important this issue is to eat healthy, and it seems like very simple, but it's not. It's very complicated. So today we have our regular podcast hosts, and Candy Sheehan and Scott Kiddle and myself, Lydia Istomina. And we will have today Shelley talking about, as I said, topic of eating and nutritional food. But so the general title is how to have a healthy relationship with food. So it's not just about what we eat, but how to have healthy relationship with food. And our subtopics today will be what to do about our food cravings, also how to eat healthy without trying so hard, and then the last subtopic will be how to take care of yourself in body, mind, and spirit even on busy days, which is, how it throws us out when we are busy. So welcome, Shelly. Please introduce yourself to our audience.
Thank you. It's nice to be here. Thanks for the opportunity. Like you said, my name is Shelly. I'm a nutrition mindset coach. I'm trained as a dietitian and an intuitive eating counselor. And so what I do is I help busy women who have a lot going on to feel like they can have a healthy and joyful relationship with food, because all too often it's one or the other, right? So for me, it's really fun to be along on that journey to discovering like, hey, food can actually be fun again. Food doesn't have to take over your life. It can just support your life. We can nourish ourselves to be able to have our best lives possible. And so that's where the work that I do comes in. And like you said, it's not just what we eat. It's also the how and the why we eat. So that's where the mindset piece comes in. So I do all of that blended together.
And I'm sure that when you talk about healthy relationship with food, you're not talking just about, suddenly stop eating because food is bad. But it's about building relationship, just like we built with other people, correct?
Correct.
So,
Yes.
yes. And so, as I said, that we will have this fascinating topic today. But why did you even start teaching people how to have this healthy relationship? You seem so healthy, so young. It's like I kind of expect people who are, mature and then maybe made so many mistakes and gained weight, lost weight, exercised, gave it up. But how did you come up with that?
Yeah. I mean, thank you for the question. It is an interesting observation that you bring up. Like normally, I think a lot of people come from cycling, like you were talking about, gain, lose, gain, lose, gain, lose, and realizing that this is not effective, right? And in my case, it didn't come from personal experience of weight cycling, but it did come from experience in my education and my experience as a dietitian. I started working in a public hospital, and when I was there, it was a lot of the same thing, right? You see a patient, you give them the education, they're sick in the hospital, they just had some major problem, they're not ready for a big change like this. And then they forget everything that you said, not because they're not trying to remember it, it's just because they've got a lot going on. And then they come back like 3 months later. And I felt like it was very ineffective. I felt like we were shaming people for what they were eating or not eating. We were giving recommendations that didn't fit the patient or their situation. And clearly it wasn't even the right time or the right way to intervene at that point. And so at that same time, like while I was having that really frustrating job experience, I was also realizing that I had some personal medical conditions that could be benefit from changing what I ate. And I was really struggling with the recommendations there and what I actually wanted to do. And not because I didn't want to be healthy or I didn't want to see an improvement in these conditions, just like the patients that I was seeing, right? It's not that we all don't want to be healthy or as healthy as we can be in that moment, but it's that sometimes the things that we are trying aren't the right things to get us where we want to go, right? But they're the things that we hear all the time that should be the things that we do. And we're missing out on it's kind of like saying, oh, I really want to go, I want to see the Eiffel Tower. I want to see the Eiffel Tower. And so you miss all of France on the way to see the Eiffel Tower because that's the only goal that you have in mind. And like, that doesn't make any sense, right? Most of us would try to enjoy the rest of the trip as well. But if we're so focused on that one aspect of health or one idea that we have and how we think we're going to get there, we lose all the other joy in our life, right? It just becomes this all-consuming thing, and we miss out on all the other goodness that is going on. And so I was feeling like I was missing out on my life because I either have to choose between eating right or having a life without all these, the problems that were coming from my medical conditions. And I was seeing my patients have that same decision, right? Eat right or miss all your goals. And it didn't feel like a great situation to be in. It didn't feel like a great thing to be encouraging people to be in. I got really frustrated. I started realizing that health was actually more attainable with fewer food restrictions. And as I started learning more about that paradox, and intuitive eating and health at every size model, and just the idea that nutrition could be a weight neutral thing. It could be a non-diet thing where we're not prescribing certain foods that you have to eat, good and bad foods, that kind of thing. That there was so much freedom in that and enjoyment and life. And instead of saying that you had to choose between giving up your life in order to somewhat get some kind of health, maybe, or you could have your life, but you're just going to die young, and all this fear and everything that we kind of like, we get from having a diagnosis of any kind. If it impacts your life, you start having these fears, right? Oh, I'm going to miss out on certain things, or I might die early, or maybe my quality of life is going to change. And that's all fear-based. And I don't think we have to do that anymore. Like, we can actually move forward in a way that is life-giving, in a way that is joy-filled, in a way that, encourages ourselves and the people around us. Because how many people do you know that they go on diets and they're just miserable? They're miserable people, and they're miserable people to be around, right? So it's much better to have that freedom and the joy in eating so that it doesn't just take over. Yeah, but that's how I got into it, is really not weight cycling myself, but seeing the effects of that on other people, or seeing that the effects of that, like, just really clearly seeing what you have to lose when we're following such restriction, right? And then learning that there was a better way to do it. And that's what made me shift.
So it sounds to me as just that this topic, how to have healthy relationship with food, is not just about food. It's just about everything. That's what I just hear today. Thank you. This is fascinating. So let's see that maybe Candy and Scott have questions before we continue.
Right. I'm just wrapping my head around this. I have been fortunate in my life that I haven't ever gained huge amounts of weight and had to lose huge amounts of weight. I'm kind of like a typical person at my age group. I'm probably just slowly creeping up the ladder and putting on weight. And so I know there would be better ways for me to eat, but I've fallen into a very bad habit of, if I'm really sad, I might eat something. If I'm really happy, I might treat myself with ice cream. If I use food in the wrong way. And I guess I wondered how you address that when you're really using food as kind of, you get to a certain age, and probably I'm not going to go out and ride a bicycle right now, but I might go in and get a cookie, I don't know. You just kind of celebrate or do things in a different way. And I'm struggling some with that. I'd love to know what you have to say about that.
Candy, thank you so much for your question. You're definitely not alone. As you mentioned, right? Like, this seems like you said, oh, I'm at that certain age where, you're experiencing certain things. And so what I'm hearing is you saying, I'm at that certain age where I see a lot of other people doing the same thing. So that you're not alone in this. I talk to people of all ages who are experiencing eating for emotional reasons, of many different reasons, right? But I don't think that's a bad thing. So here's where I'm coming from. I think that eating for emotional reasons is a normal part of being a human being. It's a normal part of learning to cope with our emotions. It can be one of our tools in our toolbox. When we talk about coping with emotions, I think there's a problem when it's the only tool that we have. It's the only method that we have to cope with emotions that we want and emotions that we don't want. Because then it's not the best match. So when I'm with my clients, I often talk about need matching. And need matching, the way I describe it is food meets, so pretend this hand is food, and this hand is our need that we have. The only way that it is a perfect overlap is when there's a physical need for food, so hunger. I have a biological, a physical need for food. And then I fill that need with food, right? Perfect match. Great. If we have, say, we're missing, or the one that you were talking about, I'm celebrating something. Okay, so I'm going to celebrate something, and I'm really excited about it. And cookies, just historically, maybe in my mind, feel like a celebratory food. So I have the emotional need for celebration, and maybe some social need for celebration. And I'm going to get a cookie, which is a food. And again, the only thing that cookie is going to 100% match is the physical need, right? So in that emotional need and in that social need for celebration, or the desire for it, then we put the cookie, and there will be some overlap. The cookie will feel great. It emotionally will feel good. Like, actually, the cookie physiologically will help you release certain chemicals in your brain that does make you feel better emotionally. So there is some overlap there. Maybe that cookie was baked, you and your family members baked it, or a neighbor brought that over. And so you feel that connection, the social connection as well. But look how much unmet need there is, or unmet desire. And look how much extra the cookie is giving you, which isn't a bad thing, right? Our bodies can use this. It's not like, oh my goodness, you just now have extra and you're overflowing. No, that's not how it goes. Our bodies are very smart at being able to use what we give it. That cookie will be used for energy, right? Regardless of the need it is or isn't matching. But as a concept, this unmet need can still be calling for attention, right? And when we have that, then sometimes people will feel like they want another cookie because it partially filled that. So your brain's like, okay, let's do that again. That wasn't quite enough. But it really isn't going to do any more than that, right? So we're going to have to find other ways to fill the unmet part of it. And again, if food is the only thing we have, I'm glad you have something, because at that point we're talking about you have zero coping without it. So you might as well have some kind of coping. Great. I'm glad you have some kind of coping. But without additional coping skills gained, you're always going to have that unmet need. You're always going to have that gap between where you would want to be, right? Social, emotional, whatever it is. Or maybe it's a lot of times people say oh, I'm feeling sad, or I'm feeling like I have low energy. And sometimes those are physical things, or physical and emotional, and they're partially met with food, even though I said, food can meet a physical need 100%. If your need is truly for sleep or rest, food is only going to partially meet that, right? Or just for a short amount of time. So in that sense, we're still going to need extra coping skills. We're still going to need to know how to identify and support ourselves in meeting our needs, right? And so some of that is just a learning how to cope with our emotions, how to cope with our situations that we find ourselves in. But I think that the number one piece is really saying it's not a bad thing. It's a normal thing. It's a normal experience, normal human being experience to eat for emotional reasons. And because then otherwise, what else is happening, right? We pile on guilt to that, and then we feel bad about it, and that adds more emotional need.
I think the most important thing you said that really helps me is, when I ate a cookie, that didn't quite do it. So I think I'll have one more, but that's not going to do it either. And you are so right, because believe me, Shelly, I've tried that before. It doesn't work. I'm still needing something. That is so important to mention there. And I think about that. How do you determine, well, what is that other thing I need? It's really not food right now. And how did you figure out that piece, or how do you help people with that?
How do I, so I think my connection went a little spotty there. Let me rephrase to make sure I heard your question correctly. How do I make sure that the need is food, or how do I help them identify what it is if it's not?
Need is. Yes, yes.
Yeah.
What the need really
So
is.
part of that is helping the person that I'm working with to reflect and to build the skills of awareness first, because before we can actually practice the coping skills, sometimes we just have to have awareness skills that we know how to check in with ourselves. We know maybe the language around naming some emotions, or even just comfortable and uncomfortable if you can't name the emotions, or we can't identify them all. Like maybe you have an enormous list of emotions in your head, but you're not quite sure what you're feeling right now. Are you comfortable or are you uncomfortable? And that's a good start, right? Just identifying like what is happening here. And then after we come up with that information, because the information is just neutral information, then we can run it through the, like, what would I like to do about this? Where would I like to go? Now that I know where I am, where would I like to go from here? And sometimes that work has to be done with another person. Sometimes it's only within themselves. Sometimes we talk it out in the session, depending on the need that is identified, or, the situation that the person is in. Sometimes I'll refer to counseling or therapy. But if it's something that we can do, a lot of times it's just a matter of listening to the client, helping them listen to themselves, figuring out what might be going on. When things come up, sometimes I'll ask them, like, how is this helping and how is this not helping, which can kind of get to that needs matching. It can also uncover a lot of other information that can be used in other different directions, depending on what we're talking about. Sometimes it's more about figuring out, not so much about what the exact need is, but maybe what the thought is. So even if they're not sure what the need is, if you say, okay, what were you thinking right before you got the cookie? I wanted to celebrate, right? I think this would be fun. So then you can think, okay, so what emotions were coming after that thought? Oh, it was really exciting. I was excited about something. Great. And then you had a cookie. That was the action. And then how did that cookie make you feel? And what were your thoughts around that? And then on and on. And you can just keep going with the thought and the emotion and the action pattern and see like what comes out of that. And sometimes that by itself will identify some beliefs that are there, like cookies are a way to celebrate. Because that's a belief. Not everybody has that. Right. But that can be something that can be very helpful in saying, oh, I needed a way to celebrate. I wanted a way to celebrate. Right. So even if you weren't clear on that, and I wasn't clear on that, even just by asking questions and seeing what comes up, that can be a huge source of information, which again, information helps you make informed decisions. So that information is always neutral. It's not like, oh, now you must be feeling bad about yourself because you chose the cookie. No, it like, great, you celebrated. Wasn't quite the celebration you wanted. So next time, maybe you'll consider something different. Yeah.
Interesting. So if we don't know who Shelly is, she is a mindset coach. And that's what I hear now, that besides that you teach people to have healthier relationship with food, because some of us do have maybe healthy relationship. We eat healthy. I know, can you eat healthy? But, accidental cookie will not kill us, right? But at the same time, what I hear that, and I want to share also how I see my children raise their son. So, for example, I think from the very beginning, they, in a way, coach their son that there is no difference. And tell me, please, Shelly, how do you interpret that? So they put on a plate everything that the boy needs to eat, including a small dessert. But they've read it and they practice it that all food is equally healthy. Of course, they don't put there something unhealthy, but they do not implant in my grandson's brain that dessert is a reward, or dessert is something that comes only after you eat. Because I remember how my mom we even have a picture in the family when my sister and I we sit, and my sister drinks like, let's say, Pepsi Cola, and I drink buttermilk because I'm younger, and mom has a strict look because unless I drink that buttermilk, I will not get Pepsi Cola. You see? So, but what I see on the plate of my grandson is equally like cucumbers, avocado, um, let's say maybe chicken. They have lots of chicken, and maybe a piece of tiny piece of strawberries, and maybe a tiny piece of cupcake, tiny piece. And he just, put it in his mouth with his fingers. Everything, one after another, does not distinguish. So how would you interpret it as a mindset coach? What does it do to a child when the child grows?
Yeah, so I think their approach about, allowing all foods and not villainizing or lifting up as like the prize, like you said, the dessert, right? Because then what happens? Buttermilk is like the lesser food, and dessert is like the Pepsi Cola, the best food ever,
The best,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, and it's also forbidden food because in order to get there, you have to go through certain
You have to,
pathways. Yeah. So instead of doing that, we say, okay, all of these foods, morally, they're equivalent. You're not a good or bad person for eating the cupcake versus the chicken versus anything else. Emotionally, as much as we can, they're neutral. It doesn't mean we'll all feel the same about each of those foods, right? Just like we were talking about with the cookies. You might feel like cupcakes are party food. I always associate cupcakes with parties.
Yeah.
So I always feel really happy and special when I eat a cupcake. And so like cupcake to me would be like, wow, this is really special and exciting. And also it's sweet, and I don't it's fine, right? All of that is fine. There's Ellen Satter is a great resource for family feeding. Ellen is spelled Ellyn. Ellen Satter, and she has a bunch of resources around child feeding at different stages. And one of the main things is the division of responsibility. And so from an intuitive eating perspective, where we're using our internal cues rather than the external food rules, we say that as far as the parent-child dynamic goes, it's the parent's responsibility to have the available foods, right? To put foods out there, to give the right environment, to set the right mood so that the child's not overwhelmed or distracted. But it's the child's responsibility to determine how much they're going to eat and of what they're going to eat of the available foods. And then that shifts as the child grows, and as the parent can give them more independence, then they get to pick more and more of those responsibilities up, right? Until we're fully adults and we can make most of those decisions ourselves, given out of our situation, right? So if I want cupcakes right now, immediately, that's not an option because I'm in this meeting and I have cupcakes nowhere near me. So that, those kinds of things, right? But as an adult, we can see okay, our brain can look and say there are no cupcakes here. I'll have to choose something different, or I'll have to decide something different. That's not an option. But out of my available options, what would I like, right? And then our preferences get to play a role, which I usually refer to as the tongue, our taste preferences in this moment, saying, hey, I really like, in general, I like drinking water, or I like drinking tea, or whatever. I have both of those available right now. So if I wanted to, I could. And if my body's saying, my body would be how I say is the feelings that we have right now and how we'd like to feel after we eat. If my body's like, oh, I'm kind of thirsty, I could use some water, great. I would go reach for the water and I drink it. So it's kind of that same idea where if the child, because children are natural intuitive eaters, we know how to eat by instinct when we're born. And as we grow, right, that can either be encouraged or it can be discouraged. So a lot of my work is undoing a lot of the things that people have been taught over the years and bringing them back to that state of being like, hey, you could eat, let yourself eat. Let yourself enjoy your food, let yourself play with your food and explore the different senses, and having that experience again, rather than just having a list of foods that we can and can't eat, or the pressure to eat healthy all the time. Even that sometimes, when people are like, oh yeah, I have a really healthy relationship with food, and I say, oh, what does that mean to you? Oh, I eat healthy all the time. I eat vegetables all the time. I don't eat this or that, and I always eat these things. And I'm like, oh, okay, great. What do you feel when you eat all those things? what is your favorite food? And they can't tell me their favorite food, or they tell me, but I don't eat it all the time. Like I can't have it in the house. I say, oh, that's a red flag, right? If you can't have your favorite food in the house without feeling out of control around it, you don't have a healthy relationship with food. You actually have an unhealthy relationship with food, because that comes from an unhealthy mindset around that food. So it's not necessarily about what we're eating. It's about how are we approaching how we eat and what we eat, right?
That's very interesting, because I have the only prohibition for myself and my husband to never buy sweetened condensed milk. I can't have it in the house, because when I was a little girl, I could just eat it nonstop. And even when the whole family is asleep, I am at the refrigerator. I will eat it. So even in America, I don't buy it. But if I buy it, then I eat it. So I realize I have unhealthy relationship with sweetened condensed milk. So can you have a question?
I did, but I love that story. Thanks for sharing that, because it makes me feel good. That is a problem I have. I think one of the relationship problems I have with food is knowing how to set limits on what I eat. It's not that I'm eating things that are so unhealthy. The amount I'm eating that's where I get in trouble. It's over a serving. I know. I think it's not that much, but I know that I don't really monitor my serving size very well. And I wonder how you advise on that.
Yeah.
You need that big plate. Yeah.
Who gets to decide what a serving is?
Right. I read I really do read packages somewhat and say a serving size. And then sometimes I look at the serving size and say, oh my, that's way too much. No one can eat that much unless they want to put on a little weight, so I might look at a serving size and tell you whether or not I think it's right. But I do kind of keep an eye on, how much you should eat. And sometimes I know I woke up this morning feeling full, and that made me think you ate too much at supper last night, or you would have been hungry for some breakfast. And see, I wasn't hungry at all. So I just felt like somewhere, I don't think I got up at night and ate. It's possible, but not that I know of.
Yeah. So again, your question is really common. Your situation is really common, right? A lot of times we feel like, both in Dr. Lydia's example and in yours, like sometimes we feel out of control around our food, or we feel like we're eating too much.
Right.
But then again, that question comes in is, who gets to tell you how much is too much? Who gets to decide too much, right? Because each body is different, and each body is going to require different amounts at different times. Like you said, in this morning, you weren't feeling very hungry. Maybe you ate a lot last night. Maybe it was something else going on. Maybe another time you are very, very hungry. A lot of times when we're sick, for example, we're not very hungry, right? And we have that's a pretty common experience as well. And so our bodies are going to require and going to experience hunger in different ways. And so a serving size on the package is not going to adjust for that, right? It's just going to say X amount of potato chips, and it will be like a fraction of the bag. And a bag is like so small, it's like this big, right? And people are going to be like, I'm not eating 3 potato chips or 10 potato chips or whatever the number is on that particular bag, and leaving like the other 3, because it's going to be like, oh, it's about 1 serving, but it's not really. And serving size. Okay, so the thing about the serving sizes were not meant to say this is how much you should or shouldn't eat. Serving sizes were a way to try to quantify a specific amount so that we could systematize the information that people were getting, so that they could experience the information. Like in that, you said you read the nutrition labels. The nutrition labels start with how much food they're talking about, and then how much is in that particular amount of food, right?
Right.
Otherwise, what are we going to say? We're going to say, oh, it has X amount of vitamin C. In what amount, though? Because if you eat a lot of that, it has more. If you eat less of it, there's less, right? Or you're getting less per 100 grams or per serving size. It's still the same. That's fixed. But per amount that you ate in that one sitting, that might change, right? Because the amount might change. And so I see nutrition labels as something that can be useful for certain people if they have the groundwork mindset laid out first. If they don't, I actually see it as quite harmful in a lot of cases because it becomes that external rule telling you, you should or shouldn't eat this amount, or you should or shouldn't feel bad about eating this amount, or whatever it is. And it puts a lot of emphasis on things that we really don't need to be emphasizing because, again, we know how to eat. We might be confused at this point in our lives, right? Because we've heard so many different things, but we're born knowing how to eat, and we don't know calories when we are born. So we do know how, when we're hungry, when we're full, and those kinds of things. So it really comes back to, where are you getting your information from? Who gets to tell you, right? Are you using those external cues, or are you using the internal cues? Externally, it doesn't know you. Internally, you know you. You can use, if your brain, so I talk about this with my clients as tongue, body, brain alignment. And what I mean by that is those three pieces that I mentioned earlier. Tongue is the taste preferences you have. Body is how you feel now, how you'd like to feel after you eat. Brain is your thoughts, your knowledge, your experience, the both like of the patterns of your eating and around like of your schedule or around your environment, right? So if those are all working really well and all in alignment, you're going to be the most satisfied. And satisfaction has been researched to show that it's the healthiest for us overall. Without trying so hard, we can become healthier eaters by just going for what truly satisfies us in all three of those areas. And if it's been hijacked, however, or if one is, misused or underused or overused, for example, our brains often get filled with all this external rule information. Oh, you can only have a certain amount, or you can only have a certain amount of calories, or some kind of thing, or a lot I hear, women are only supposed to eat such and such, women are supposed to eat less than men, women are supposed to stay under a certain amount of calories, women are supposed to not be as hungry, or we're supposed to keep our same body weight for our whole lives. That's unrealistic, right? None of those are true. So it's, where are you getting your information? Who gets to tell you the information? What are you relying on to make that decision? Bringing that back into a right relationship, and then trying to align so that it's all, all based in satisfying all three of those areas rather than just one or two.
That's a great thing. Go ahead, Candy.
Well, I was just curious then. So you really don't, when you're working with a client, you don't set like a goal weight for them or anything like that. Do you talk about how much someone weighs, or if you see that someone is obviously, they appear to be overweight, but that they have an active lifestyle and they're happy and they're well adjusted, do you say, well, then that's not a problem? I'm trying to kind of understand that. Is their relationship with food okay? Is it okay to, is that not a factor that you worry about?
Yeah, it's, so that the last part is a very interesting question, because you started in with the kind of that assumption that a lot of people have, and I had when I was growing up as well, is that having weight on us or being a certain size or shape at some point is a bad thing. It just flips over and becomes a bad thing given a certain set of circumstances. And maybe there can be mitigating factors like, oh, well, they exercise, or, it whatever. The thing is, it's really not related to health in the way that we think it is. It's also not a behavior. So we can't choose to be a certain size or shape, right? Unless we're choosing to cut off limbs or, do surgeries or something like that. And it's not permanent either. We can try to control things, but often, like you were talking about before, right? There's that weight cycling happening, and usually the weight cycling happens in an upward trajectory. So you gain more than you lost, and so over time you're actually creeping up and up. And that is the only thing that we can control about our weight. So the overwhelming body of evidence says that for the majority of people, I'm talking like 90+% of people, if they try to lose weight, they will regain it in the span of like 5 years or less. So if you've ever gone through that weight cycle, you're not one of those, 5 to 10% of people that can successfully keep it off for the rest of their lives. So if you fall into that category, like the majority of human beings, it's not something that we can control just from changing what we eat or changing how we move or, managing our stress or releasing our energies or whatever it is that people try to do. It's not something we can control. It's set by predetermined factors or things that maybe happen to us, but aren't things that we can control. So I prefer to focus on the things that we can control, the things that we have some say over, and that have proof that they actually help with our health. So, for example, eating a variety of foods, right? Eating a variety of foods is linked with many health outcomes, positive health outcomes. Eating lots of fruits and vegetables, drinking enough water so that we're adequately hydrated, those kinds of things, managing our stress, all of those are recommended activities that regardless of our weight are beneficial to us. Again, I'm not telling people to do them because they have to, and I don't push those on people. We get there through the nutrition recommendations come usually near the end of when I'm working with them or kind of woven in throughout, but with a heavy dose of mindset and self-compassion and self-care, because again, if we start putting the gentle nutrition things first, it just becomes another diet, right? And we know that diets don't work. So I start with the mindset and the thinking around that first, so that we escape from that, we pull back, we reset, and then we can approach our food in a totally different direction. And when we come with the nutrition aspect, it is gentle, it is nourishing instead of something that we have to be, shamed for or have to follow a certain path or something like that. So I don't worry about people's weights, whatever they are. I don't worry about their shape. I don't, encourage people to lose weight or gain weight or anything like that. I think as long as we're talking about non-eating disorder clients, because sometimes there needs to be weight restoration, which is something when somebody has a severe eating disorder, and in that particular eating disorder, maybe their presentation shows that they lost a lot of weight. They're going to need to regain weight up to the point where it's their body's natural amount to be at. And so that's the other piece of this is sometimes our bodies, even without an eating disorder, sometimes we feel like our natural body weight should be a certain size or shape.
Right.
And as we start fixing our relationship with food and as we start allowing ourselves to eat more food or eat in a different way, then our bodies change. Up, down, sometimes they stay the same. And that can be quite distressing or it can be quite encouraging. But what I really want to recommend and encourage is that we have a more neutral, accepting position of our bodies. Whatever our weight, shape, size is, that we are nourishing it at the body that we have right now, right? And whatever it becomes, we're going to nourish it at that size or shape then. That we're not fixed on the scale, that we're not fixed on inches or, fitting into our clothes or trying to look like our high school weights or, stop a natural process that maybe we are all just, having that thin ideal in our brain and saying that this is what a normal body looks like, when a normal body doesn't actually look like that when it's well fed, right? When people actually are eating in the way that is healthy for them, that it may be actually a little bit higher than they're expecting it to or hoping it to be, because maybe they actually have never been allowing themselves to eat as much as their body needed. And then again, that, it doesn't erase the fact that we live in a world that still values that thin ideal, right? It still values and honors that smaller body more than the bigger body. And there's all these kinds of discriminations and choices that get made against people who are in larger bodies. Like, there's a lot of negative things that can happen. And so that is something that people will have to work through, right? It doesn't mean that that's all okay. I'm not saying that those things are okay. I'm saying that they're a reality. And I think it's irresponsible of us to say like, oh, well, you can accept yourself, whatever body shape or size you are, and not to acknowledge that this is also the reality, that there is some benefit. Remember I was talking about how is it helpful and how is it unhelpful? In that question, like even around our weight, like if I embrace, if I was in a larger body and I embraced myself in that larger body and I decided not to try to change it and just let it be however it was going to be, then some of the unhelpful pieces of that might be that I would have to then experience or tolerate some difficult emotions based on how other people interact with me. And that's that's an unfortunate piece. And then trying to lose weight, even if I know it's a futile attempt, even if I know it's going to raise my weight in the long run, some of the benefit might be socially, I have a lot more opportunities, right? Economically, I have a lot more opportunities. And those are real benefits and real detriments that we need to be addressing and need to be considering when we're talking about this. That, it's not just as simple as like, oh, well, just accept yourself and, think positive thoughts and all that. Like, we're living in a world with other people, and other people have all kinds of beliefs and expectations of ourselves too, like what they think we should be and what we should look like.
I'm glad you brought up economics, because if you think about how many times I've heard that people in the third world countries are much happier than people in America, let's say. And of course, we talked many times when we talked about coping, that people who live in a much harder environment, when you talk about the natural desire, natural need of the body to get food, so in a way, people in the third world country, they don't, unless they don't have food, the first thing they do in the morning, they have breakfast, whatever they have. Is it true that in the wealthier countries, people have the luxury of like, I have the intermittent fasting, because now it's all the, big thing, intermittent fasting, or we pay too much attention in a way to food, including myself. But what I've heard Candy said, for example, I found on one of your interviews an interesting thing, that nutritional approach does not fit in the same way all people. It's kind of customized and catered. And so when Candy says, I woke up today and I did not feel like I'm particularly hungry. So I want to show on a screen, and I've tried to show it before. And so this is when I think it's a very interesting approach. And I think it applies to, of course, wealthy countries. Because if you think about how people choose and they treat food, they say, for example, oh, I have no time to eat. I mean, yes, even in the poorest countries, people know that because they go to work, they have to eat, right? So then another thing is, and then you kind of classify it. And so others say, I'm not hungry in the morning. And it seems like you customize. You have different approaches to people who have a different sort of a mindset, since you are a mindset coach. So you advise them how to eat under each approach. Like, for example, if my mindset is I have no time to eat, or mindset is I'm not hungry in the morning, or I don't like the breakfast food. So could you spend a little time on this? Because I found it absolutely helpful. But also tell me, is it true that it applies only to countries like America, when we have a luxury to choose and kind of feel like, well, I need to lose weight. I don't want to eat breakfast. I can't. And I will struggle until lunch. Or I'm proud of myself because I can stay without food for 10, 12 hours. So how would you advise if I don't feel hungry, or I just reject breakfast because I think it's bad for me? But do you, first of all, advise to eat breakfast? And secondly, how do you customize it for different clients?
Yeah. So we touched on three things there, right? The economic factor.
Yeah.
The how do I advise clients in different situations, and do I advise eating breakfast? So I'll start with that one. I usually recommend that most people eat something in the morning. Okay. It doesn't have to be a breakfast food, right? Breakfast around the world looks very, very different. So what is a breakfast food is really just mindset. It's determined by you, or the family you grew up in, or the culture you're living in, or the culture you're from. You get to decide that, right? You are now, assuming we're all adults, like, you are in charge of your food, again, given the economic situation that you have to choose from. As a segue, if you are not in a situation where you have a lot of funds, or you are not in a situation where you have a lot of choices, I think it's different. So one of the things that we often forget in America or in other countries that we have a lot of access and economic resources, we forget that food is a basic human right. In other countries where food is a thing that's either denied by somebody else or maybe isn't accessible, that's very obvious, right? Like, oh, we need to eat. It's a survival thing. And in that case, I believe it's Ellen Satter again. She has a hierarchy of food needs. Always, the basic is getting enough food. Any kind, but enough food to nourish ourselves, like to be able to sustain life, right? So at any point, that's where we're starting first. And so that's whatever is available, whatever you can eat that is available to you to get enough that you can live the next day. That always comes first. Because without that, like all of your body processes, including your thinking, cannot function correctly. Over time, starvation does a number of things throughout the body, whether it's starvation because we have no resources available or starvation because we're choosing to put ourselves in that situation and telling ourselves that we can't eat for whatever reason it is. And I think you touched on a really good one. A really common one that people don't recognize a lot of is I feel proud when I can control myself or I can control my food. There's a sense of like accomplishment and pride. And sometimes if that's missing from our lives, like we were talking about coping earlier, right? If that is a need that is missing from our lives and we're trying to get that from food because we think we have a lot of control over this and it feels really good, then that it can be really hard to eat normally and intuitively when we are trying to control it so much and trying to get that satisfaction out of our food, not from the food that we eat in a nourishing sense of the word, but out of the satisfaction of controlling our food. And again, what is helpful, what is unhelpful, right? But if that's not the case, and we're actually just trying to figure out like, oh, maybe I would love to eat breakfast, I just have these barriers, that's where this other piece comes in, where if I don't like breakfast foods, choose something else, like eat something. It doesn't matter. The benefit of eating breakfast is really that it kickstarts the rest of your day. It helps your metabolism get going. It's part of waking up. It's part of our normal rhythms of being a human and waking up and going to bed and all of that. And it starts us all off during the day, gives us enough energy to do the other things we need to do. Even when you think about like emotional coping, right? How many have felt that feeling like everything is terrible? Oh, I just needed to eat. Right? Everything calms down once you eat. And it's the same idea, right? If I eat something, it feels so much better. Life feels so much more manageable. Things go more smoothly and it's all good, right? So even in that example, like you can set yourself up for a better day just by eating something in the morning. And that's a pretty simple, like happier life kind of thing that most people are like, yeah, I'd like that. It also, when we're talking about cravings, for example, eating something in the morning can really help with cravings in the afternoon because our bodies are going to need some food, right? We can push that off as long as we can, but ultimately we're still going to need food. So either you're making it all up at night or you're trying to, or you can spread it out throughout the day. And that's actually a much more healthy option because then our hormones and everything involved in the process of digesting that food, they're not like giant food spike and then trying to digest that all. It can come like a little bit more throughout the day. So yeah, if you don't like breakfast foods, eat something. It doesn't have to be a breakfast food. If you don't have time, eat something faster. And it's okay. So we have this other idea that food always must be 100% just the food. Like when you sit down for a meal, you have to only be doing that meal. Maybe in an ideal world, that could be the case for most people. But I think I would rather go with something that is practical. So if you're very busy and you have a lot going on and it's a choice between doing something while you eat or not eating at all, do something while you eat. Maybe have a mindful bite in there somewhere where you pause, you really experience that one bite, and then you just go on, right? Like you don't have to have a whole mindful meal. Let's make this practical. Let's make this something that is doable, with removing that barrier so that you can actually take a step forward toward that feeling that you want to achieve, right? Without making it a big deal, because that's the whole thing. It's like, let's not make our food this big deal. Right. So let's take that back a little bit. How do we make this easy? How do we make it calmer? How do we make it so that it doesn't take over our lives where we have to plan it all out, right? So if you're hungry, eat something. If you don't have time for it, eat something faster, or make something that you can like is more hands off so that you can be doing your other stuff. Like I know a lot of people, my clients will check emails or catch up on news or something like that while they're making their breakfast. So they're going to do something that is easy to do that with. So the example that I gave in that particular interview was doing oatmeal. And then they can just kind of like wait for the oatmeal to be like making itself while they're doing the other things. And then they can just quick put it together by the end. Or, you know, maybe you like overnight oats. I'm not a fan. I don't like them, but other people really do. So then you make things ahead of time when you do have the time. That can be one option. Make things faster, grab something quick. If you're not hungry in the mornings, or you're having a morning when you're not hungry. Like, for example, it might not happen all the time, but you know, but if it's that one time, we're still gonna need fuel, right? So let's just put something small in and then see how we feel a little bit later, and then eat something then. Because sometimes it's just a matter of maybe I'm still too tired, like I woke up in the wrong part of my sleep cycle, or you know, something else is going on. I'm just too warm. When we're too warm, we don't get as hungry. Many other things can affect hunger and fullness. It's kind of a tricky thing. But, you know, maybe just in that moment, part of nourishing yourself just looks like, oh, I'm going to try a little bit of this. I'm going to do some other things. Maybe I'll set a timer if I'm prone to forget to come back to check in with myself about my hunger. Then I'll have something already in me, and I'll be able to keep moving on with my day and continue eating the rest of the day.
You know, when I have those mornings and I just wake up and I'm not hungry at all, it's usually my breakfast is a handful of grapes. And I don't know if that counts. Does that count, Shelly? A handful of grapes?
You're eating something, right? You're eating something. And then as long as you're continuing to go in, checking in with yourself, you know, making sure that you're not going too long without food, like, it's probably fine.
That's good. You see, you have a very healthy relationship, Candy, with food. That's good. But so, and like you said, it could be also something else. So sometimes we wake up not only in the wrong side of a sleep cycle, but also maybe not feeling well. Something is going on, and so then we just need to listen to our bodies, but not to make a big deal out of that, right? That's what I hear. So, and that's what kind of answers our question about how to take care of for yourself, because it's all of us. Body, mind, and spirit. And even if it is the busiest day of our life, or we woke up on the wrong foot, then we still need to take care of ourselves. Like you said, show self-compassion, self-care, self-love, even on the busy day. But so, Scott, Candy, any other questions at this point?
I had a question that came to mind when we just initially started. And I saw this, how to have a healthier relationship with food, as was scrolling across the screen. I thought, well, so what are some of the indicators of an unhealthy relationship with food? And I think you largely answered that question, not by, you know, you're unhealthy if you do this or you do that, but it seems like you've reframed the whole question. I loved when you were just bubbling and talking about joy and freedom. Now, how often do the words joy and freedom enter into a conversation about dieting? Right?
Only when we're talking about giving it up.
Yeah, right. So, yeah, I imagine there's indicators in our mindset that we can choose to change to increase that joy and freedom, as opposed to keeping us from getting fat or getting sick, right? Is that kind of how you would reframe it?
And even a reframe of that one, right? To say, like, getting fat or getting sick, like, is that really our concern? I mean, yes, it is our concern, right? I think culturally we have those concerns, like, these are the worst things that could happen to us. Like, you heard a lot of people coming out of the pandemic, and they're like, oh my goodness, I gained so much weight. And you're like, you survived a pandemic.
Yes.
Why are we talking about this?
Right.
Like, is this what we're concerned about? Like, we have a problem. Like, as a society, we have a problem. Yeah. So I think that's part of the thing is, like, our unhealthy relationship with food isn't just about the food. It's about what we think is going to, is going to happen to us because of our food. Like, we have given it so much power. Right. Where, oh my goodness, if we eat this cookie, or if we do this thing, or if we skip our workout one day, we're going to, life is going to end. as I know it. Really? Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Things like that. Like it just doesn't. That's not how that works. So really taking it back from the catastrophizing and bringing it back into that neutral idea. Yeah. And then the other things that I already talked about.
I love it because it's true that especially with pandemics, people worry about things but forget that they survived. Even the fact that they talk about it says that, oh guys, I never thought of that. Thank you. Because we do worry too much about, oh, I gained an extra pound, including myself, but I'm no better because this is how we grew up. But it's funny enough that in my country, I'm from Russia. It used to be that every time the family takes children to the sea, to the ocean, and the family comes back, and unless children gained weight, people look down at the family and they say, oh, it does not look like you had a good vacation. It's like, so it was a different side of that problem, but that's how we were. And so parents try to stuff us with all kind of food that we come back and we look healthy. But it's true that it's beginning with a very, very early age and continues until we die. But again, just because food is a natural part of life. And I appreciate you so much that you told us today that it is not about as much as about food, but it is about how healthy our relationship is with food. And if we think about it that too much, like what we ate, how we ate, when we ate, did we gain weight, then it is unhealthy. Thank you. I think it's all about joy, right? Joy and happiness. So please give our audience your advice in the end.
Yeah, I think here's a question that I leave a lot of my clients with. Kind of my one big guiding question can be, what is the most nourishing thing that I can do for me right now? Mm-hmm. What is the most nourishing thing I can do for me right now? And that can be helpful for choosing something to eat, choosing how much to eat, choosing, what other things might be helpful, what other people you might need to see or not see, anything like that. Like that's a really good self-care check-in question to go with. And if you don't know, then if the pressure of like what is the most is too much, then what is a nourishing thing that I could do for me right now?
Mm-hmm. Very good.
Very, very helpful. And so it doesn't even have to be food, but I truly liked it. I went through several of your interviews and I like how you view people even. So you don't approach them. Candy had an excellent question. Do you kind of worry about their weight and their body shape? You said, no, I don't. Because what you see the individual, you see the person. And you don't want a woman or a man continue struggling in this life like, oh my gosh, I'm afraid to step on a scale, or I'm afraid to go to the doctor for 2 years because they will break the scale or something like that. But what you do, you see an individual and you want this person to be happy. Mm-hmm. And that is possible, like we talked today about, to have good relationship with food. Also, what to do about our cravings. I love that. Our cookies, our cupcakes, our ice cream, right? My condensed milk. That's the topic. And then also how to eat healthy without trying hard. I liked your approach about like, okay, I don't like breakfast food to begin with. Then eat your leftovers, eat your whatever you had in the evening. Very easy. Very good. And the last one was how to take care of yourself in body, mind, and spirit, even on busy days, because we are all busy. Thank you for you just the light in the world today, because you showed us that life can be very healthy, very easy, not necessarily as we're afraid even to open the refrigerator because it's too many temptations. So thank you so much, Shelly. Thank you, Candy. Thank you, Scott. And thank you everybody who watched us today. And we invite you every Saturday to join us for our Coping Life Talk, because we talk about coping. And coping, as Shelly said, does not have to be just food. There are other ways to cope with our moods, with our problems, and with our tragedies, not following all the stuff with food. Thank you so much. I would love to invite you back maybe next time. Thank you. Have a wonderful, wonderful evening.
Thank you too.
Bye now.
Bye.